We're in the book of Ecclesiastes, and Solomon is getting near the end of this chapter, and he has done some experimenting. He's gone out and trying to find the answer to the question, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What am I trying to accomplish? And he's looked at a lot of different things, hasn't he? And he's been looking at these things in the light of death, right? If man is just here, lives his life, and dies, then he says the end is what? Vanity and vexation of spirit. Now, Solomon never excludes God, okay, during this experiment. I mean, from the very start of his reign, God has been involved in his life, hasn't he? I mean, it was God who granted him this wisdom to do what he's doing. So he hasn't omitted God. He's just looking at it from that particular perspective. But occasionally, he will insert God into the text. And in Ecclesiastes 2, verse 26, he does that. And listen to what he says. For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner He giveth travail to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. We ended this class last week reading that verse, and I told you that there are two laws that are presented in that particular text, okay? Two laws. Did anybody find out what those two laws are? No, I forgot what you even assigned us to do. Okay. Law number one, the law of equity or the law of fairness. Okay. Is God a respecter of persons? No. Does God favor one above another? No. Not as far as individuals are concerned, okay, just as being a person. But guys, there is a law of equity. To those who are good, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy, the text says. Okay, now when he says good, what does he mean by that? Does he mean our standard of good? No. Today, anybody who dies is good, right? You know, it doesn't matter how wicked and evil you are. If you die, the preacher's going to say, oh, he was a good man, or she was a good lady. Doesn't matter how you lived your life. That's not the standard of good. The standard of good is God's standard of goodness, okay? That are good in His sight, okay? And God has a totally different standard of goodness than you and I do, okay? And notice that God gives wisdom, knowledge, and what? Joy to those that are good. Now I wrote down something, okay? And it was this. These gifts are not tangible in nature. Are they? They're not. Wisdom, knowledge, and joy. I can't go to the store and buy any of them. Isn't that something? We are so worried about the things of life, right? And what we can accumulate and what we can have and what we can get and all of our toys and all of this and all of that. And when God wants to give gifts to men, He's not too concerned about the physical things of life. Has He promised that He'll give you food? Yeah. If you'll be faithful, He'll give you food. Has He promised to clothe you? Yes, He's promised to clothe us if we'll stay faithful. And I find it interesting that He didn't even promise a house. Isn't that interesting? When you go to Matthew the 6th chapter and you read what God will do for you as far as the basics of life, there's two things. I will, number one, feed you, and I will, number two, give you clothing. Hadn't even promised us a house. Hasn't even promised us a tent. Hasn't even promised us a lean-to. Because as long as I have clothing, I can do what? I can bear the elements, can I? regardless of heat, hot or cold. As long as I got the right clothing, I can bear any elements that are out there. And God's promised that I'll keep you alive. I'll keep you surviving. I will give you the basics of life. But beyond that, He's not too worried about the tangibles. But to those that are good, I'll give you what? I'll give you wisdom. And I'll give you knowledge. And I'll give you joy. And guys, you can't buy that. Okay? You can't buy those things. These gifts are intangible, but they are the most important gifts that an individual could ever possess. You see, we have to get our focus off what? Off the physical. This life is, for the Christian, for the child of God, for those who are trying to do good in the sight of God, it's not about this world. And we've got to get our minds off the physical. Is that hard to do? Oh yeah, it's extremely hard to do. But notice what he says He gives to the sinner. To the sinner He giveth what? Travail. Man. When you look up that word, it is exactly the same word that is translated labor in other portions of the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay? What does he say? To the sinner, I give struggles, and I give difficulties, and I give hardships. The life of those who are sinners is often hard and difficult. And this can be true even though they appear to live in the lap of luxury. Isn't that true? You know, the rich and the famous, they always show to us the what? The good side, don't they? You know, some of the best things about these reality shows is that what you find out is these rich and famous, it ain't good. Okay? They're yelling, they're screaming, they're drunk, they're on drugs, they're going to jail, they fight each other, they hate each other. Now folks, I don't know about you, all the lap of luxury doesn't make any of those things more pleasant, does it? They just don't show us the hard side. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to go as far as any of them. Behind the scenes, there is turmoil and strife and sadness. So there's the first law, the law of equity. But notice also, there's a second law that's in here, and that's the law of retribution. The law of retribution. Notice what he says. He says, but to the sinner He giveth travail. And then he says this, to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. Man, there are times when God takes from the wicked and the evil and the sinful, and guess what He does? He gives it to those who are good. Okay? Let me give you an illustration. It's right there in your notes, Exodus 12, 35 through 36. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. Had Israel been treated pretty badly by the Egyptians for a long period of time? Oh yes. They've been living under bondage for several hundred years at this particular point in time, hadn't they? They've been whipped, they've been beaten. Pharaoh had done everything he possibly can do in order to reduce their numbers because he was scared to death of them. Okay? He was scared that if they sided with the enemy, then they would easily be overthrown, would they not? So he made their life rigorous with hard bondage. But when they exited the land of Egypt, guess what? They spoiled the Egyptians. There is a law of what? Retribution. Okay? Sometimes God makes certain that the evil provides for who? For the good and for the faithful. But notice how he ends the text though. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. Now why did he say that? Those two laws sound wonderful, do they not? There is equity as far as God is concerned. There is the law of retribution as far as God is concerned. But then Solomon says, but this is vanity and vexation of spirit. If what? If all we do is die and there's nothing else. So what if God treats me as one of His faithful better than a sinner? If all we do is both come to death and there's nothing else, so what? So what if He takes from the evil and gives to me in this life and then we both just die and there's nothing else? So what? Life's just what? Vanity and vexation of spirit. Man, I don't see how people live without God in their lives. Do you? How do you do that? Because life means absolutely nothing without Him. You know that? There's no real reason to be here except to satisfy the flesh. All right, now we enter into Ecclesiastes 3:1, and Solomon kind of changes his perspective a little bit. Changes the way he talks about some things. And he begins with these words, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. You thought the Beatles wrote that. And they did not. Okay, the Beatles stole it from who? They stole it from Solomon. The opening line, to everything there is a what? A season. The opening line could be translated as follows. Life has its moments. Okay? Life has its moments. Solomon contrasts 14 different areas of life. Okay? In this particular section. Ecclesiastes 3, 2 through 8. Everything has its season. Everything has its time. Everything has its purpose. That little word season means this, an appointed occasion, a set time, an appointed time. Barnes translates the term as, and I love this, fitting time. To everything there is what? A fitting time. Okay? And he talks about some of those times in our life. He doesn't talk about every one of them, but he talks about a bunch of them, doesn't he? In his contrast. To everything there is a what? A time, he says. There's an occurrence, there's an occasion. There is a point in time where all of these things happen. He says, to everything there is a purpose, a delight. What I like is the way Strong says it, a valuable thing. Everything that he's about to talk about happens at some point in the lives of every human being. There is a time, there is a season for every one of these things in our life. And every one of them are what? Purposeful. Every one of them are valuable if you look at them in the right way. Okay? You have to be able to look at them and see them in the right way. Now notice that it says, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. I wrote this on point D there. The fact that everything has its time does not mean that God ordains everything that comes to pass. Okay? That's not what he's saying in this particular text. When the laws of nature are violated, things have their time, right? If you don't believe that, let me give you an illustration, okay? If you go home today and you jump off your roof backwards, onto your back, I predict you will hurt, you will cry, and you may take a trip to the hospital. You see, to everything there is a what? There is a time. Okay? There's a time. And I can predict it just as well as you can, can't you? Now, two things, okay? Don't go do what I just said do. Now, I know how some of y'all are, okay? Well, the preacher said to do it, okay? I wish that were the case. Boy, if that were the case, we'd have a boatload of people here today. But the second thing, just because I know what's going to happen at that time doesn't mean that I made it transpire, does it? No. Solomon's just saying this. There are certain times, there are certain seasons in every person's life, and every one of them has a what? Has a purpose. Or we could say every one of them is valuable to man. That's what he's saying. When events happen in our lives, things happen at those times, right? When we make certain choices, things revolve around those choices. When rulers do certain things, are there certain consequences to those actions? Yes. To everything there is a what? A season and a time for every purpose under heaven. And can we predict what's going to happen at those times? Yeah, to a great extent. We can, when you say, when we enter war, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to die, isn't it? We're going to spend a lot of money as a nation, right? There's going to be a lot of families that are going to experience a lot of sadness. True? We may also, though, dispose of an enemy, right? Somebody who has been tormenting us and persecuting us for years and years and years. And the only way to get rid of them is with a what? With a war. Okay? So yes, so we can predict a lot of those things that are going to happen. And there's a time for those things, Solomon says, in all of our lives. Clark writes this: God by His providence governs the world and has determined particular things and operations to particular times. In those times, such things may be done with propriety and success. But if we neglect the appointed seasons, we sin against this providence and become the authors of our own distresses. Man. Notice the last point there. Of the 14 contrasts, only one stands completely under the hands of God, and it's the first one. There is a time to be what? Born, and there is a time to die. Those two fall under the hands of who? Under the hands of God. Now, he's not talking about an exception to the rule. Can I cause my own death? Oh yes. I can commit suicide, cause my own death. But in the normal course of events, okay, which that's not a normal course of event. In the normal course of event, I don't control the day I'm born. Okay? And I don't control what? The day I die. And yet, there's a time for both of those, aren't there? Very, very interesting. Questions, comments on that verse? Beautiful verse. Beautiful verse. All right, let's go to the contrast because these get even gooder. Okay? He says this: there is a time to what? Be born, and a time to die. How many of you in here know the date of your birth? Some of you don't. Poor things. Poor things. We'll send off, come to us. The church will provide you with a birth certificate. We'll pay for it. You need to know the day you were born. See, every one of us have a time when we were what? Time when we were born. Okay? Notice point B there. Once a woman is conceived, the doctors are pretty accurate in telling the parents when the child is going to be born. For the most part, aren't they? It's amazing to me. They can almost get it to the very day. Okay? In some instances. At least within a week or two. Okay? There's a time to what? Be born. You walk into a doctor and you say, "Hey, doc, I think I'm pregnant." "Yep, you are." And your next question is what? "When is it?" And he'll tell you. How does he know that? Because there's a time to what? There's a time to be born. You see, there's certain things that happen around these times that are predictable. Doctors can determine the date of our birth or very close to it. But notice also there is a time to what? there's a time to die. Since the fall of man, death has become one of the enemies of the human race, has it not? Genesis 3:19, "In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return." We're all familiar with Hebrews 9:27, aren't we? "And as it is appointed unto men," what? "Once to die." That doesn't say that God appointed the day of your death. Okay? It says what? We're going to die. It is appointed unto man once to die. I'm going to die. God didn't predetermine the very day of my death. Okay? Yep, Vic will die of cancer on, whatever, such and such date. God doesn't do that. He just said that man will die. Man can intervene and choose the day of their death by means of suicide, but listen to me, folks, that involves the taking of innocent life, doesn't it? Innocent life. And the Bible tells us what? God hates hands that shed innocent blood. Now, I would put a caveat to that, okay, a footnote to that. And there are some people who are what? Mentally ill when it comes to committing suicide, right? And the only thing I can tell you in those instances is this: I'll let God handle those situations. Okay? Because I don't know. I don't know. I'm not His creator. I don't know what's going on in His, and I don't know, folks. And God doesn't give us enough information in Scripture to be able to make a definite statement about those situations. They're tough. Extremely tough. And so, notice the next point under D there, okay? Have we learned to manipulate death a little bit? Yeah. Guys, back in the, 20s and 30s and 40s, okay, of the 1900s, did individuals die earlier? Yeah, they died earlier. It was common for individuals to die sometimes in their 50s and 60s, and that wasn't, when you got to be 70 years old, boy, everybody said, what? Oh, man, he's really old, okay? And now you call an 80-year-old person old and they say, I ain't old. I sometimes I look at them and wonder, how long you think you're going to live? Okay? It's almost as if we all expect to live to be how old? At least 100. If I don't make it to 100, I've been cheated. Unbelievable. But how do we do that? We manipulated it by exercise, by diet, by medications, by surgeries. We can do a lot of things now that we never have been able to do in times past. And we can extend life, but guess what we'll never do? We'll never cause life to continue forever, will we? Death will always come. I don't care if we come up with a medicine that enables us to live as long as Methuselah. Okay? We will what? Die. The Bible says, and Methuselah was 960 years old. 60 and 9 years old, and he died. You're going to die. You're going to die. There's a time to die. I had to put this in here, though, folks. Paul was a unique man when it came to death, wasn't he? And I talk about this because I think we as God's children need to develop the attitude of Paul with regard to death. Okay? Yes, death is an enemy. And yes, most people fear it. But when you listen to Paul, guess what he had done? Through Jesus, he had conquered that fear. It didn't bother him one iota, did it? For me to live is Christ, and to die is what? Gain. That's the way Paul looked at it. And guess what? He wanted to die when? Yesterday. If he could have. Do you know what? I am in a strait betwixt two, he said. having a desire to depart and be with who? With Christ. I have a desire to leave this world. I'm sick of this place. I don't want to live here. This world is not my home. This place is evil and nasty. This is the realm of Satan. I want out of this place. That's Paul's desire, folks. He got arrested. He got put in a Roman prison. And here's what he said. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. You think Paul was scared of death? Paul didn't manifest any fear toward death. And every child of God needs to develop that attitude. I'm going to what? Die. There's a time to be born and there's a time to die. Whether that was yesterday or 30 years from now, you're going to what? You're going to croak. It's just that simple. We're all going to die. Yes, sir. Ooh-wee. Man. Now see there, you 80-year-old folks, y'all are just spring chickens, aren't you? Isn't it interesting that on our gravestones, we only put 2 dates? There's a time to be born, and we put that one on there. And there's a time to die, and we put that one on there. And our whole life is summed up in a what? A dash. That's how long you live, folks. You know it? That's how long you live. Right? Our life is a vapor which appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. It don't matter whether you die at the age of 35 or 95. Guess what? Life is short. And you are not here long. And as a Christian, we ought to long to get out of this world. And that is a hard desire to develop. You know that? Jeannie? Oh no. But she had to be kind of convinced. She had to be convinced. You know, when he first offered that invitation, don't you know? She knew what was going to happen, but she resolved herself to that fact, didn't she? Absolutely. So there's a time to what? Time to be born and a time to die, folks. And can we predict certain things that are going to be happening when these two occasions arise in life? What happens when a child is born? Yeah, what's that? Yeah, I was trying to be positive about this, okay? You know? I've never heard a mama look at that baby and say, well, poor little thing, you're just now starting to die. I mean, it is true, but you know, but I can predict some good things. There's going to be some phone calls made, aren't there? There's going to be some people driving some distances in order to get there, right? There's going to be some tears of happiness, right? There's going to be some bragging going on. That's the prettiest baby in all the world, right? That's grandparents, okay? When somebody dies, can I predict what's going to happen? Some things that are going to happen? Oh, yeah. There's going to be some phone calls, aren't there? There's going to be some traveling. There's going to be some tears shed, right? And there may be some what? There might even be some bragging, mightn't there? You know, don't we do that? When an individual passes away, we like to, you know, yep, they do take pictures, you know. So see, that's what he's talking about. There are points in time in our life, and we know. Let me ask you, is it valuable to be born? See, folks, if you weren't born, you could never go be with God in heaven. Can you? That can never happen. And if you never died, guess what? You couldn't make that transition either, especially waiting and waiting and waiting on our Lord's return. Right? There's good and bad in all of these. Notice the second one. Solomon makes a smooth transition about a similar experience in the plant kingdom, doesn't he? He says this, there is a time to what? A time to plant. We usually call that the planting season, don't we? The planting season. Different things are planted at different times of the year, aren't there? I used to think it interesting. After I grew up in Memphis, so I was a city kid. I knew nothing about farming whatsoever. And but my first works were, guess where? Rural communities. So everybody, guess what? Farmed and did all that stuff. So here's a guy, he puts in he has planting season, right? When is that? Usually around the spring of the year, okay? And then he works all year long through the summer. He finally has this harvest at the end of the year, and all of a sudden you start hearing that they're planting again. What are you doing? I'm planting again, you know? There's sometimes a second type of wheat that can be harvested. There's sometimes that you plant what? Greens and turnips and all that kind of stuff. And you want them coming up when? In the cold part of the year, don't you? You see, there's a time to what? There's a time to plant. There's a time to plant. Different parts of the country plant different things at different times of the year, aren't there? When I moved here, I moved from Tennessee. In Tennessee, you are told this: do not plant any flowers in your garden until after Mother's Day. Now, Chateau down here says, ooh, that's late. That ain't late in Tennessee. If I plant them earlier than that, guess what's going to happen? They're going to die. Why are they going to die? There's going to be some cold spells still. Okay, now sometimes we do. You know, you get that warm weather in April and you think, oh man, spring's here. I'm going to plant me some stuff. You go out and buy you $200 worth of stuff. You plant it, and guess what? April 30th, they're gone. Are you kidding me? $200 flushed down the toilet. Now, I moved here, and guess what I started trying to do? I tried to plant everything after what? Mother's Day. That's what I was told. Right? No. In Florida, there's a time to plant. You want to know what that is? About the 1st of April. It's almost a month and a half earlier than what I had to plant there. Because it gets what? It gets better here, warmer here. Spring's earlier here. And if you don't do that, you're going to mess up, folks. There is a time to what? There's a time to plant. But notice this second one. There's a time to pluck up that which is what? Planted. What do we call that? Isn't it funny? We call it planting season, but we don't call it pluck up season. Okay? Sometimes we do call it the what? End of the season, don't we? At the end of the season. I noted at the end of the season, this is a time of work. This is a time of hope. This is usually a time of rejoicing and celebration. And occasionally it's a time of what? A time of sorrow. I had a friend of mine that worked with us at the children's home. And when he got out of high school, the thing that he wanted to do is be a farmer. Okay? And man, he went out and he got in debt and he bought him a farm. He got him all the equipment. And the first year, made nothing. Oh, he was sick. Okay? But you're in it now, right? So guess what you have to go do? Got to go get in debt again. Right? And you hope somebody will fund your debt. He works and he works and he works. Year 2, nothing. Nothing. Barely paid off his debt. He says, guess what? I'm going to do it again. Works and works and works. Get to the end of that harvest. Guess what? The most bountiful year they'd had in like 10 years. He said, man, I couldn't believe it. I was rolling into bucks. Next 2 years, nothing and nothing. That's why he works at the children's home. Now, if you don't believe that, you come to me, I'll give you his name, you call him. Hey, Cup, why'd you quit farming and go to the children's home? He'll tell you real quick. Sometimes you don't get a what? You don't get that bountiful harvest. But it's still pluck-up season, isn't it? You still got to pluck up. Can you predict what's going to happen usually when you plant? And you can predict fairly well what's going to transpire. If you couldn't predict and if there was no hope, then we would never plant, would we? So we can. You know, in a couple of days, these things are going to start looking a whole lot better than they do now. For some reason, when you first plant them, they start to die a little bit, don't they? If I put the seed in the ground, I know in maybe a week or so, I'm going to start seeing little sprouts come up. I know that. And I also know what's going to happen at harvest, don't I? And I can predict all of those things. There's a time for these things, folks. And notice he says this, there is a time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to what? Build up. I don't know about you, but I hear that word. There's a time to kill. Does that kind of give you the EBGBs or whatever you call it? Kind of make you cringe just a little bit? There's a time to kill. And we might ask ourselves, when is it ever a time to what? To kill? Well, the reality is there are times to kill, aren't there? June? You can tell she's from the country. Hog killing weather. That's what we got down there, don't we? There's a time to kill animals, isn't there? You don't gotta. You don't gotta. You know, poor little spider, go on. But there is a time to kill, isn't there? I've had a couple of dogs put down. You know it? Why? Because it was a time to kill them. They were sick. They were diseased. They weren't going to get well. And rather than keeping them in a period of misery, what do? We put them down, don't we? There's a time to kill. There's a time to kill for what? For food, isn't there? Like Jim was saying, there's hog killing season. And that's a big deal in the South, or used to be, wasn't it? Man, I mean, it was a big time of year. So there is a time to kill. Notice I put down there is a time even to kill human beings. Man, now that is a tough one, isn't it? Somebody come into my house, going to hurt my children and my wife. It's time to what? It's time to kill, isn't it? Okay? When we go into warfare, we know it's a time to what? It's a time to kill. And guess who I'm about to kill? I'm about to kill other human beings. Does God authorize capital punishment? Yeah, we don't talk about it anymore. Everybody wants to do away with it. But God plainly authorizes capital punishment. The Bible tells us that the government beareth not the sword in vain. Folks, the purpose of a sword is to what? Is to kill. Okay? Capital punishment is authorized by God. There are certain crimes and there are certain things that individuals can do in violation of law that deserve what? Death. And God has authorized that. And He even authorized it in the Old Testament, which was a holy law, was it not? So there is a time even when it comes to human beings. But notice also, there is a time to what? There's a time to heal. Okay? There's a time to heal. Notice what I said. In fact, in our society, we seek to do everything to heal before we what? Before we kill, don't we? Especially in our society today, we don't just rise up and immediately try to kill somebody. We do everything we possibly can do in order to heal that person, if it is a person, before we what? Before we kill them. Medicines, treatments, therapies have all been designed to bring healing to animals and man. Okay? So there is a time to kill, and there is a time to what? To heal. Ah, the bell. Right in the middle of a verse. That's not a good place to be. Bring your verses back next week, and we'll talk about there's a time to break down and a time to build up. Good stuff.